So Phil, what type of table image do you think players should try to cultivate?
Okay, that's a very difficult question because it really depends on the table image that you're giving off at the time. I don't really think that players should try to cultivate a table image. It really is kind of dictated on your cards and the situations that come up. So like if you have to fold 14, 15 hands in a row and they think you're playing tight, then you take advantage of that situation. And if you have to raise 4 or 5 hands in a row, or the cards dictate that, or the situations dictate a raise 4 or 5 times in a row, then you have to take advantage of that. So really, your table image has to do with, the situations that come up and what your opponents are thinking at the time. I don't think you should go to a table and try to have a table image. Try to say, okay, I'm going to have a loose table image today, or I'm going to have a tight table image today, because then you are kind of preparing for poker. You really have to try to live in the moment and take advantage of the situations that come up at the time.
So let's go with the one that I think is probably more tricky and maybe a little bit more fun. You've raised the 5 hands in a row. How can you take advantage of that? What are some examples? What would you do?
You raise 5 times in a row, so you have to be paying attention to who's observed that at the table, and they know you're playing a lot of hands, so maybe they'll re-raise you a little lighter. You have to be aware of that, so maybe it's time to re-raise them and try to win that pot right there. Or maybe it's time to just give up and say, you know what, I'm going to fold this hand and I'm going to wait for a better situation, and I'm going to try to scale it back and maybe wait for a bigger hand to take advantage of this guy, because this guy thinks I'm playing really loose now. And if you happen to have good timing and pick up a big hand, then maybe you could bust him because he thinks you don't have anything.
How would you try to do it right there if the stacks are right pre-flop, or would you, if you have the big hand like kings or aces, you even take a chance to see the flop and just call?
Well,
again,
that's a very situational question. I mean, against certain players, I would say you just call before the flop. If you think they're going to bet the flop and the turn every time and try to steal it there, then maybe you can just call. Against certain players, maybe you want to re-raise because there's a good chance that they're going to re-raise you right then and there, and you'll get to get a good percentage of your chips in before the flop, which is always good too. So it kind of it depends on your opponent and how they're playing, and how your opponent plays. So that's why it's very important in poker to really be observing your opponents and how they're playing and what they're thinking.
Now, for fun for me, I find it hard that you would ever fold 15, 16, 17 hands in a row. We've played a couple times together. I don't think I've really ever seen you do that.
It's very tough. For me, it's very tough to fold that many hands in a row because, I'm playing position. I'm playing the situations that come up, and I'll play a lot weaker holdings. So it's a lot tougher if you're playing correctly. It's tough to fold 15, 16 hands in a row. But there's times when it comes up, especially late in the tournament, where there's raises in front of you and your chip stack's not appropriate to be taking chances and things like that. So there's times when that situation does come up where you have to fold 12, 13, 14 hands in a row.
And what are some things that the players can do when that happens that they might be able to take advantage of? What can they look for?
You can look for, if you end up folding that many hands in a row, you could look for opportunities to steal, to raise and steal the blinds, or to re-raise in position or sometimes out of position with a weaker hands, thinking that your opponents will fold. But hopefully you're playing against someone that's observing how you're playing. You have to be really in tune and in the moment of what's going on, because if you're playing against someone who's not paying attention and you're trying to re-raise against them, then it's not going to work because they're only playing their 2 cards and they're not playing against a player. So you have to really be paying attention to who's observing and who's not, and pick and choose your bluffs wisely, because the last thing you want to do is bluff a guy where it had no chance of working. It's one thing to get caught and someone to call your bluff, and maybe you had a 50, 60% chance of it working. It's another thing to be bluffing against a guy where you have 0 chance of it working.
For me, bluffing, when you said stealing, it's a lot more fun to steal and bluff and get chips that way. At least for me. How about for you? What do you think?
Yeah, it's much more fun when you win with nothing. You feel like you feel like the skill comes into play, like you're winning hands with nothing, and they don't really know what you're doing, and then you're playing a lot of hands, and then hopefully if you pick up a hand, you get to bust your opponent. So it's nice when you win with nothing.
I like it.